Hi, everyone, and welcome to Book Date with 8, a CBS 8 book club where we showcase books by San Diego authors. For our fifth book and our first pick of the year, our team chose Eleanore of Avignon by Elizabeth DeLozier. The book tells the story of a healer who risks her life, her freedom, and everything she holds dear to protect her beloved city from the encroaching Black Death. It's a dark idea, a dark premise. Elizabeth joining us in studio this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I want you to start off, well, I'll start off by saying this. This is your debut book, but I mean, beyond this, you have a BA in Spanish literature, a bachelor's in biological anthropology, a doctorate in physical therapy. How did you come about adding author to your list?
Oh my gosh, I guess I'm just sick.
But it's interesting because it feels like the book has components of all of those things. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, you know, writers are first and foremost readers, and I've always been that girl in the corner of the party with my nose in a book. And so, you know, being able to study Spanish literature in college and really falling in love with different kinds of voices, and then studying physical anthropology, which is the story of human evolution, which I think is one of the most interesting stories ever told. And then getting into physical anthropology, physical therapy and working with patients and working with women, I think it all sort of informs the book.
Did you feel like you were Eleanore in that you wrote this during COVID, you were not necessarily in the ER or anything like that, but you were still on the front lines, you could say, interacting with patients. Did that play a role in your writing?
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, like you said, I wasn't a nurse, I wasn't a frontline worker in that way, dealing with, working with patients with COVID, but I was going in every single day and seeing patients, putting on my, face mask and all my masks and my gloves, and it was really scary. And so we all remember what that period of time was like, and coming home at the end of the day and spending time with Eleanore, I think my own experience and my own fear and the rawness that I felt really informed her as a character.
For people at home who don't know anything about the book, give us kind of a brief synopsis. I gave like a sentence there, but go into a little more detail.
Right, so the book is set in 1347 and follows Eleanore, who is a young midwife and healer with remarkable skills, just like her mother before her. And she wants nothing more than to practice medicine legitimately. So she meets in a chance encounter the Pope's physician, who is a real man, who really lived in Avignon at this time, and she strikes a deal with him. If she can cure the Pope, then she can become his apprentice. And so, spoiler alert, she does, because otherwise it would be a really short book.
There's some challenge along the way, I will say, but you already see that strife in her at the beginning, but then she eventually does, and I mean, that's just the beginning of what becomes a very dark tale.
Yes, right, because the plague comes to Europe and wipes out between 1/3 and 2/3 of the population. So Eleanore and her mentor are trying to figure out a cure and the cause of the disease. And at the same time, the beautiful Queen of Naples and Sicily is on her way to Avignon to stand trial for her husband's murder, which also really happens. And she is pregnant and in need of a midwife. So that's where Eleanore comes into play.
This has already garnered a lot of attention, a lot of support. People love it, especially as a debut book. Are you working on anything new already? Are you riding the wave of this for now? What's life like for you? Not to mention, you just gave birth just over a year ago to 2 twin boys. Congratulations.
That's right. Thank you so much.
So your life's a bit busy right now.
That's right. That's right. There's a lot going on. But I am actually working on another book. It takes place in Victorian London during the reign of Jack the Ripper. And it follows a young woman who goes to the East End to try to find her brother and stays at a boarding house, which is hiding some dangerous secrets.
And what is it like working on this? Do you feel like you're able to mentally separate yourself from what's going on with this right now, with promoting it and with talking to people about it, and with the new book? Is it completely separate in your mind, or do you feel like you take components of your writing into a new book?
Oh man, well, at this moment in time, I feel like I'm just barely keeping my head above water between. I don't think very much about things. So yeah, I just write really early in the morning, and then I'm a mom and I'm pulling Cheerios out of my hair for a lot of the rest of the day.
You're busy. Eleanore of Avignon is on, so say it correctly.
Eleanore of Avignon.
So you got to get the very end of it proper.
Yeah, you got to get up in your nose.
Thank you for joining us. Congratulations on the success. It is available now at Warwick's and at your local bookstore. We have much more on our website too. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll sit down with a panel of readers to talk more about Eleanore of Avignon. But first, take a look at our local book spotlights. Welcome back, everyone. We are about to get all of our questions and your questions answered. We are joined by Julie Slavinsky, Director of Events at Warwick's in La Jolla, as well as Book Date with 8 producer Cameron Duncan. Welcome back, you two.
Thank you.
Friends of the book club have already met both of you, but we have a lot to talk about here with Elizabeth, author of Eleanore of Avignon, and as I've learned, Avignon. Avignon.
There you go.
I'll just be saying Eleanor.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Me too.
I want to throw it to each of you to start off with our questions.
Oh, I think we should go to Cameron.
Lovely. Well, I'll start. I really enjoyed reading the sister relationship between Eleanor and Margot. So I have a few things about Margot. So big spoiler. Really
Yeah,
end
and I was going to say, this whole block is going to be a spoiler for people at home. So if you haven't finished it, this whole set is about to be spoiling, but go into it.
So obviously we know at the end of the book, Margot dies. I was wondering in your writing process, when you came up with the premise, did you know she was going to die from the beginning? I found a lot of foreshadowing throughout the book. Obviously, as soon as Eleanor had that dream where their bed split in between, I was like, oh, Margot's a goner.
Yes, I knew from the beginning that Margot was going to die. When I had the idea for the book, I was actually on my honeymoon in the bathtub, and it was like the plot of the book just dropped into my head. And I jumped out and I started scribbling on a piece of hotel paper. And the idea, like the overall arc, was a young woman who's a midwife in Avignon during the Black Plague with a twin sister who eventually takes her spot. So that was the very first thought that became the novel.
Okay.
And I do want to mention, at the end you mentioned how your mom and your aunt are twins, right?
That's right.
Did that play a role in that relationship between Eleanor and Margot, or did you feel like you drew more from your own experience, or did you consult them a lot in the process?
They both think that I got the twin dynamic completely wrong, of course. But the real, I think when this book really took root in my subconscious, I went on a trip to Avignon with my mother and aunt, who are, like Margot and Eleanor, identical twins. And twins have a magic of their own. Like my mother and aunt growing up would swap spots to take tests for each other, right? And growing up, it was almost like having two moms in a way, because they both filled that role for me in different ways. So I think that really informed the relationship. And when I was in the south of France with them, all of us were reading this book called The Great Mortality, which is about the Black Plague. And I think that's really where the seeds of this novel got lodged in my subconscious.
So you knew that you were going to write in that time period of the Black Plague? And was that easy to do? Because we were in the middle of our own pandemic.
Right.
So did the distance help you write that, or was it hard to write about the Black Plague in the middle of a plague?
I think both of those things are true, right? I think if I had been working on like a romance novel or something lighter, I think I would have been a lot happier. I think like mental health-wise, I probably would have been a lot better off. But I also think that the fear and the uncertainty that we all felt in that time period really informed the tone of the book, and Eleanor's fear as well.
Was there a lot of research research material to grasp from for that particular time period for you?
Yes and no. You know, we don't have the things that that continue to exist from the Middle Ages tend to be official documents. So we have a lot of, you know, papal decrees, and like the notes on Joanna's trial are still in existence. But we don't know a lot about what an average person's life was like at that time. So I had to make a lot of inferences and make some educated guesses for a lot of it, but I tried to root everything in reality, anything I could find.
Right from the get-go, when she's at the start meeting the man she's about to be the apprentice to, the physician to the Pope, she is you're getting these hints that she's not like any other physician that you meet. And she's really not a physician at all. She's this natural healer. And they say how all the remedies that they had known were from physicians and their medicines. And is it Guigo?
Or Guigo, yes.
Guigo, yeah.
Guigo, yeah.
He says, your recipes we need only send to the kitchen.
Yeah.
So right from the get-go, not only is she a woman, so she already has it stacked against her, but then she's also using these natural remedies. We incorporate some ideas of you know, witch hunt and of her being a witch and her mom being a witch. What was the idea behind having almost everything stacked against her in this difficult time?
Well, obviously it was really hard to be a woman. It continues to be hard to be a woman in many places. And I felt like the only story I could write would be about a woman at this point in time, and a woman who wanted more than what society would give her.
Right.
And in order to be that kind of person, you have to be really strong and tenacious and maybe even a little foolhardy, right? Which I think Eleanore is all of those things. And I also wanted to really call to attention the fact that women's medicine has always been looked down upon until very recent, and continues to be in many ways. Until very recently, women were the ones delivering children. It was beneath, male physicians, and I think that comes through in the book as well. And so I thought it was really interesting that for so much of human history, during the most dangerous and also important thing for our species to continue, right, childbirth, women were standing beside women, and there was not a man in the room. And so I really wanted to explore that piece of it, that like female natural power that Eleanore possesses, and the physicians are looking at the stars and saying, this Mars is in whatever, Sagittarius. That's probably not right.
But it also, I feel like, brings like an added validity of those, practices still being used today, whereas a lot of the practices that the physicians were using were not accurate.
Right, yes.
So which withstood the time, barrier. So it feels like her tactics did.
Going back to nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, working on things that actually work, right? And the doctors were practicing humoral medicine at the time, which we know is like, was never a thing. So that was really fun too, to just see the kind of some of the ridiculous things that they were doing for medicine and the way that they understood how the plague progressed as this bad air. I mean, there were people who were literally putting their heads down latrines and breathing bad air in to try to stop the plague from getting into their lungs.
I wasn't sure if that was like, it was like, okay, that has to be a real fact.
Yeah.
That's too weird.
That's too weird. Too weird to not be true.
Totally.
Speaking more of her mother, I did find it funny, similar to what we were just speaking about, that the women's medicines and tactics carried on. Beatrice, even though she is not really alive at any point during the book, she is kind of acts as a voice of reason. Like the snide comments of like when they talk about bloodletting, for instance, she's like, my mom never thought this worked. Or when they reference the planets, they're like, my mom thought this was like all fake. So it was really interesting having her mother be an active character without her ever being alive in the entire book. And I guess I was wondering, speaking of your mother and your aunt, how much maybe they influenced her relationship to her mother?
I think that's a really good question. A lot. My mother and aunt have always been such powerful people in my mind, and they really love arts and literature, and they're the reason that I love to travel and history and reading. My mother, they both have written things in their lives that haven't been published but are really, really good. So I think they both were the voice on my shoulder while writing this book as well. And so I think that comes through with Beatrice being this, like you said, voice of reason, kind of like guardian angel might be a little too strong, but the feeling that someone is watching over her and informing her decisions.
And wanting to live up to those expectations.
Totally.
Wanting to live up to that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit on you for a little bit here. Okay. So, because there's so many themes we could talk about in this book. And so the relationship or the attraction between David and Eleanore, steeped in...
Me and Cameron had a lot of discussion about this, so I'm glad you're going here.
We're going here because it's steeped in. I mean, you're talking about the attraction stuff, but I don't know that I realized that anti-Semitism was so prevalent in that particular time period. Because the Grand Inquisition, if I'm correct, was about 100 years later, correct? So did that, was that hard for you to bring that in? Was it really, was it as bad? I'm sure the papal documents probably show that, but.
Absolutely. When I started researching this book, I was shocked by the anti-Semitism, and many historians call the Black Plague the first Holocaust because so many Jewish communities were eradicated during that time. And I knew when I was writing it that I had to incorporate, it's such an important piece of the history, right? And it's something that I, who love history and have watched a lot of documentaries, didn't realize the depth and the breadth of the crimes against the Jewish community, the genocide that was happening. So I knew I had to incorporate it, and it seemed like a pretty natural way to have Eleanore have a love interest who was a practicing Jew. And it seemed like a way to bring it home to both of them because they have so many things in common. Eleanore, as a woman who's practicing medicine, has a target on her back. David, as a Jewish man who is also a physician, has a target on his back. And I'm pleased that that made it into the final cut, and I feel very strongly that that relationship was an important piece of the book.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't realize that they had yellow markings back. Even then, they were marked. I mean, that was fascinating to me. It was like, wow, this goes back way too long.
And in some communities, and you can read it in my author's note, in some communities, the Jewish population was murdered before the plague even came to the city as sort of like a prophylactic against the plague, right? It's horrible. Wow. So that was really shocking to me.
I also have a question related to David. We don't really see any idea of romance up until the last 90 or so pages of this book. So I spent a good portion thinking, is this strictly a tale about, someone who did everything she could to fight this plague, and that for a portion of it, I thought we just weren't going to get any love interest in it. Was it important to you to wait that long to bring in a love interest, to kind of let Eleanore have her own tale before bringing in romance, as we see in, I feel like every Disney movie that we grew up with, it's the first thing we see. Was that purposeful?
I did not want this to be a book about a relationship. That was important to me. I wanted it to be about a woman who is single, at least for most of the book, and who does not need a relationship, because at that point in time, marriage was the only thing that a woman really had to look forward to in her life. That was the big event, right? Who am I going to marry? And so you see that with Margot. And her relationship, and how badly she wants to be a wife and a mother, and how Eleanore really eschews that choice, that option. So I wanted that to be true, and I wanted, if she was going to have a romance or a relationship, I wanted it to be on her own terms. And I will say that the ending changed a bit as we were working into editing in the book. I wanted like a sadder ending than what ended up.
That's so interesting, because I was curious about that. Cameron and I, every time we were talking about where we were in the book, we're like, we're so nervous. Every single,
oh no, they're all gonna die.
Everyone's gonna die. Was that part of it? Like, what was your original, if you're willing to share, because I know that might be different.
No, so Eleanore and Paolo always made it out, and David also made it out. But I did not originally end the book with Eleanore and David being together. I ended it with her and Paolo being together, not romantically, just like as friends.
Yes.
As friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, because Evan's mom finished the book before we did, and she was like, "Oh, it's
Evan's
really,
mom.
really
Oh my
sad."
God. My mom got it from the library, yes. And the message that she told us is she literally word for word said one tragedy after another, with each tragedy being worse than the one before.
Oh, no.
But she loved it.
No,
she
she loved it. But that's the thing, is when we were thinking that, we were like, oh no.
But that's true. But that's reality.
Yes.
That was reality in the 13th and the 14th century.
It really was. But that's why I loved that her and David had a slightly hopeful ending. I mean, we don't know what happens when we get off the boat, but I totally think it was on her terms, and she was still, she was going to be trained as a physician. Like, everything was for herself. So I thought she deserved a little hope at the end. And I'd be remiss not to talk about the dog.
And the dog lives.
The dog lives.
Oh, I'm sure. I feel like if you talk to any publisher, they'd be like, you can't kill the dog.
You can't kill the dog.
There's no way.
I thought her relationship, how do you say the dog's name? Baudouin?
Baudouin, yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
I just thought their relationship was so special, and especially in the beginning, it really was a great example of Eleanore measuring herself to her mother, because that first scene, when Baudouin won't approach her and she's all down on herself, like, he would have liked my mom, but seeing that, that is who she is, and she's powerful in her own right, and she can channel whatever sort of slight magic her mother had, kind of unspoken. She only speaks about it slightly. So I loved their relationship and was so happy he was on the boat.
I know. Baldwin always made it out also. That was never, he never died.
But was he always part of the book from the beginning? Was there always going to,
there was always a dog.
There was always a dog?
Did you ever want to have him have more involvement in any portion of it?
Yes, and I think it's walking a fine line too of, this book was very grounded in reality, and yes, there are some whispers of like magical realism, and there are some whispers of this, powerful feminine energy that comes from the earth, right? But it was hard to weave in the relationship with the dog, with Baudouin, except in times when Eleanor really needed a companion, really needed hope. And so I wanted him to also represent a little bit her mother and her relationship with her mother, and coming in when she needed a shoulder to cry on or someone to remind her that she was alive and she was going to be okay. So I've gotten some flack, like I've seen some reviews that are like, why isn't there more dog in the book?
You know what,
and I've thought a lot about it.
But I agree with what you did, because sometimes when there's too much dog, it's like it takes away from it. It's not grounded in reality.
No, this isn't Marley and Me.
And it's not a dog that like talks or what. I mean, you know, I think it was done really well because it was grounded in reality. So
Thank you.
I agree.
Thank you.
I was thinking the same thing.
I wanted him to be more of a symbol, character, of course, but more of a symbol.
Yep.
There are so many characters where I feel like I went through this constant push and pull of, I hate you, no, I love you again, no, I hate you, no, I love you. I mean, Guigo, I feel like at the beginning, I'm like, he is using her and she is getting nothing out of this. He needs to hire her. He's saying hurtful things to her, but then you grow to love him. Same thing with Joanna. I feel like I was very like, at first I was like, oh, I do not like her whatsoever. And
I know this woman. I know.
Exactly. So,
We all know this woman.
I mean, I imagine that was just to show that this was not black and white. This was all very gray in terms of the standard, traditional procedures versus what these characters were trying to do to say, we see you, Eleanor. Was that, like, was your objective to show that they were just trying to separate themselves from the times and recognize Eleanor? Or was this always part of these characters, that they always felt like this was the right thing to do?
I think, people have always been people. And when you start to do research on a time period, even the Middle Ages, that feels so far away, right? It feels so remote. But once you start digging into some of the primary documents and reading people's journals that survived, you see the same fears and hopes and dreams and wants on the page that we all have. Like, maybe the language is a little bit weird, right? But people have always been people. And so I wanted the other characters, the secondary characters in the novel, to feel three-dimensional. And I wanted I wanted you to see her struggle against the power of the time, and to see her come out triumphant in some way, right? She and Guigo become fast friends, and I think he's my favorite character in the book. I love him so much. And Joanna is very complicated. She had to be a very harsh person. She had a very sad life, and in order to hold on to her power, she had to be cold and calculating. But because of the way that Eleanor helped her during her pregnancy and delivery, you see that warmth and you see that connection and relationship. So that was important to me to show.
Because she definitely had Joanna, because Eleanor took some risks by turning some things down. I mean, it was
Totally.
That was something in those days that your head might have been gone.
I was just gonna say, there was a page in the book where I thought, oh no, is she gonna kill? She can't kill Eleanor.
Trying to get her.
Oh no, it's Joanna. Okay, so let's talk. I'm switching gears on y'all again, because so speaking of names and how to pronounce things. So I'm going to call her Eleanor, because how do you pronounce her nickname?
Elia.
Elia.
Yeah, I was also wondering that.
Yeah, because I was like, the whole time I was going, is it Elle? Is it Elia? Okay, so Elia, but I was going Eleanor. So, but speaking of her name, so did you always know that you were going to name this and Eleanor of Avignon in tribute to Eleanor of Aquitaine? Was that?
No,
Okay.
I didn't. Eleanor of Avignon was the working title for a long time, and I liked the parallel between, Eleanor of Aquitaine, but I didn't know how to pull it into the book. And actually, the conversation that she has with Joanna late on, halfway through the book, 2/3 of the way through the book, where they reference Joanna's great-great-great-great-grandmother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and then she calls her Eleanor of Avignon. That was actually a pretty late ad.
Okay.
And so when it happened, it was one of those moments writing where you're like, yes, I think this is really good.
Right.
So I was excited to find that parallel, to be able to draw that parallel. The book went through, I changed the title a couple of times when I was in the querying trenches, because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted it to be. But my agent liked the title, and the publisher, I assumed they would change it, but they liked it too.
Right. But it does make you think of Eleanor of Aquitaine
Yeah.
when you see so it's right there. So I'm glad you were able to work that in, for sure.
Thank you.
I have a question. One of my favorite parts of the book, reading it from an analysis perspective, was how class kind of intersects with the plague. So obviously, I would say Eleanor is middle class, And
as
then,
much as there was a middle class in the
and
Middle
then
Ages.
you see Eric, like upper class, and then, we're constantly interacting with lower class in the streets. And we also see, you can assume the lower and middle class, they're more susceptible to the plague and that they have less distance, they're in closer quarters, and then they're manipulated by what I would call the ruling class, Father Loop, using fanatic religious ideas to manipulate them and target groups that maybe he personally, the Jewish group. So I was just wondering how you think the plague affected the classes differently and kind of how you chose to display that throughout the book.
A lot of the upper class of Europe had summer homes in the countryside. So Boccaccio, who's a really famous writer who lived during the Black Plague and wrote a book called The Decameron, which is now a TV show, he writes about this group of elites in a country home in the countryside. And a lot of people left the cities, right? Those who could did, and those who couldn't stayed and died a lot for the most part. Yes, hygiene was huge. Yes, nutrition. Eleanor and Guigo talk a little bit about the importance of nutrition in fighting the plague and how if you don't have space and you don't have the resources to actually get away from the bad air or the germs, right? We know that this was carried by fleas on rats. So of course the poorer people are going to be more affected than the richer people. And Pope Clement was put in between two huge fires in a chair. It's true. And they thought, oh, it's like the fires are eating up the bad air, but poor people can't buy firewood, right? And so, it was really just the fact that it was so hot in there that the rats didn't want to go in.
Yeah.
The fleas didn't want anything to do with it, but it worked.
And then that led to the prime opportunity for Father Loop to kind of swoop in, especially when
my
Clement
gosh.
left. Hated him,
Oh,
obviously.
hated him.
Was so angry. And then obviously he had, horrible views towards the Jewish community, so he just capitalized on this tragedy to both go after single women and Jewish people. And I feel, applicable for themes throughout history, so.
And it feels like it was very true, like you say in your author's note, like so much of this is accurate, but like I didn't want it to be.
Totally.
There's so much of it, especially with him, where I was like, it makes me so angry that he is such a vile, unchanging character, whereas everyone else, I feel like I start off being like I said, I don't like them, but then they grow. He never grows.
It gets worse even.
Yeah.
And really, it's hard to not draw parallels through modern day recent history of, capitalizing on the class divide and tragedy to polarize people. So I thought that was really impactful. And I was glad that at the end, Eric had kind of he was clearly really radicalized against Eleanor and then had a slight change of heart, or at least didn't want to be responsible for her burning.
I mean, I was glad that, and she recognized it, but never said, your apology is accepted.
She said she wouldn't forgive him.
Yeah, exactly. And then.
And I loved that.
Agreed. I was kind of glad that she stuck to it. I wanted to remove ourselves from the content of the book and ask about, with it being your debut book, what that writing process was like. I know some authors seclude themselves away. This was during COVID, so what was
secluded.
Exactly. So what was the writing process like for you as a first-time author?
It was really messy, in a word. I think now that I'm writing more and I'm working on my second book, I have a clearer idea of how to do this, and everybody has a different way, right? And people will tell you, you have to write for 4 hours a day, or you have to do this, you have to do that. I think everybody has to do it in the way that works for their lives and for their brains. And so for this book, I did a lot of pantsing, what we in the industry call pantsing. You are either a plotter or a pantser, right? I had an idea of the overarching plot of the book, but I didn't know how to get from point A to point B, so I spent a lot of time just following these crazy tangents, and a lot of those, I can't tell you how many pages got canned, right? So many plot points where I was like, this just isn't working. This is so silly. Hours of my life I won't get back, watching videos of people reenacting medieval dances and being like, okay, so they go to this dance, right? And it was fun though. It was really creative. And in my other life, I'm a physical therapist, which is wonderful. I love my job, but it's not a particularly creative way to spend your time. And so working in this book, even though the themes were dark and it was a dark time for all of us, it felt like play. And that was really fun, to be able to go down a rabbit hole of research to try to figure out what they would be wearing, and then to write these scenes that maybe never made it into the book but were an exploration of my mind. Now I'm a lot more directed. I have a plan, I have a chapter outline, and even though it doesn't always work out and we go in a completely different direction with the book, I feel more directed, but this was also fun. This was, you never
But
forget
it
your
also
first.
kind of formulates the time period, though, in your brain.
Yes,
So you could
yeah.
write, even if you didn't use it, it does help formulate that time period.
I think so too. I think my understanding and trying to get it across on the page to you as the reader, I think the more that I know and can kind of drop in without a lot of fanfare of like, this is how the tax system worked or whatever, is helpful for you too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any final question, Julie?
Well, just I think
final thoughts.
Final thought. Well, I think at the end, because the story goes along, and then you did a really good job of building that tension at the end. Was that hard to like go plodding along and then have to build that
That's true.
and
That
go?
last like 50 pages.
The last 50 pages were really good
Nail-biting.
and really good.
There's a lot, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's hard because one of the things about historical fiction, if you're doing it the way that most writers want to do it, which is staying as close to the dates and as close to the facts as possible, it can become very burdensome. So like when we were working in edits, one of the things about the last 50 pages that my editor said was like, this is a lot of plot points. Could we maybe have Guigo leave the city with Pope Clement? And that would free up Eleanor to go through these other plot points without having to take care of him when he got the Black Plague, which editorially, for sure, makes so much sense, right? But Guigo got the Black Plague and stayed in Avignon, and that is super important to him as a character, and I was not willing to give that up. So yeah, the last 50 pages are a little bit bonkers, but it was important to me to try to, all of those plot points were happening for real at the same time, and so I tried to stay true to the time period.
It was bonkers, but it flowed really well, and it was very, it kept your tension going for
Well,
sure.
and I always feel like when I get toward the end of a book, if it starts slowing down at any point, I get disinterested. So for that last 50 pages to really amp up everything, I mean, part of me was like, oh, I want this to be longer, I want this to be longer, but I kind of liked the pacing because it kept me so gripped. Like you were even saying
and
the same
it felt
thing.
realistic. Like life was moving that fast. Like, people were dying within 24 hours, so it makes sense things were really picking up. And, as, all these problematic beliefs were growing. But yeah, the ending was great. And love Paolo.
I know, Paolo. What I did right is that all the characters that I went back and forth with, I never went back. He always was so pure from the start.
Yeah, Paolo
You
is-
never wanted Paolo to have any bad.
No, and nothing bad ever happens to Paolo.
exactly.
Paolo
He
also
stays-
gets out
When
on
he
you.
was the one that got her, I was like,
Of
That
course
would
it
be
was
a Paolo.
That's right.
Of course it was
I said,
Paolo.
leave it to the gays. You knew it. Literally, and I thought that was an interesting plot point too, because it's really subtle in the book. You never say that directly. He gives this interpretation of, I don't think I will ever marry a woman who I'll be attracted to.
Totally.
And so I kind of love that it's not like this is some, I feel like present day it would be so easy for him to say it. But at the time, I doubt people really directly said it.
No,
He
they
could be
couldn't.
murdered.
They
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
couldn't.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So that was very true to what the time period was
Yeah.
too, which steeps us all in that.
And Eleanor needed a friend, right? So David became her romantic interest, right? And he's also there's this connection of being other. And then Paolo becomes her friend, and there's a connection of being other. So I love that there was that little triad between the three of them, these people who are supporting her.
Really good.
We could talk so much
Yeah.
more.
But you can talk more
That's right.
at a Warwick's event coming up.
Oh, that's right.
This summer.
This summer with it will be with Elizabeth and
Anna Rasha,
Anna Rasha.
Yeah.
who wrote The Stone Witch of Florence.
There it is, June 25th.
Woohoo.
7:30 p.m.
At Warwick's.
And where's Warwick's, Julie?
In La Jolla. It's the oldest continuously family-owned bookstore in the country. Oldest bookstore in San Diego too, and woman-owned.
We can get lost there for hours on end, and we encourage you to do so. It's also animal-friendly too, which I love. The
animal
dogs
friendly.
come walking through, all that kind of stuff.
They
So,
don't talk though, but they're
no.
good.
We
They're not that long.
Realistic.
They're very realistic dogs.
we love that you've been a part of our book club for a year and a quarter
I know,
now.
it's been great.
This is Cameron's very last book club with us because she's going to move to New York.
But
if you
I'm
want to tell our book club where you're going.
I'm moving to New York. I got a job at CBS in New York, so, but me and Evan founded book club, so.
Yeah,
And
we
then
founded
Julie was
together.
Yep.
our
you
partner
can
in
do-
crime,
It was a good,
so.
it's
But
been
I'll
a
be
good
reading.
trio.
I told Cameron she still has to read the books that we
Yep.
select, and that we can Zoom you in.
Yeah.
for
I can be
the
right
meetings.
there.
Oh, that would
Yeah.
be like Oz. Come in like Oz.
Yeah.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you too, as well as
you.
always.
It was
And
great.
thanks to you at home for joining us today. discuss Eleanore of Avignon. It's on sale now. Go grab a copy if you haven't already. Keep it on the bookshelf with you, and then you can always come back to it. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back to reveal our next book date with 8 pick. Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited to announce our next selection for Book Date with 8. We'll be reading Run Away With Me by New York Times bestselling author Brian Selznick. It is a young adult romance novel telling the story of 2 boys finding each other and falling in love over one summer in Rome. The book comes out on April 1st. You can pre-order it now, and then in the summer, we'll be sitting down with Brian to talk more about the book. To learn more about our book club and watch any of our previous book club Book Date with 8 selections, you can head to cbs8.com. You can also download our free streaming channel. Have a great day.